after all these things which have been said, I should be blushing, and I really don't think I deserve so much, and I really don't know how to thank you, but thank you very much. And after Dr. Curtis's very excellent and interesting presentation, mine, which deals with everyday problems of the life, is going to be very mundane and boring for you. And if I hadn't known that there would have been such a situation, probably I wouldn't have presented this. But in order to give you a general view and a global impression of urban planning in Iran, we tried very hard to, in this brief period of one day, to gather specialists, and we carefully considered the subjects of the papers so that a general view of the 20th century urban planning in Iran could be exposed to our audience. And we have also been careful, while keeping the academic side of our papers and our distinguished presenters, who are all well-known personalities in their own branch. We have been very careful not to repeat the same subjects and so on and so forth. So I haven't actually written a paper on this, because on this I have two papers, but this one on purpose I didn't write it, and I'm just going to reminisce on some of the problems that faces an average urban planner in Iran. Some advantages, mostly disadvantages, and at the end of my presentation I will show you some slides. So my presentation will be divided into two parts. The first part is the part that shows that about the management and the general legal or whatever organizational aspects of urban planning in Iran. And the second part is a slideshow, in fact, which I will try to point out the physical problems and aspects of urban planning, not only in Iran, but generally worldwide, and also in comparison to Iran. The general problems that faces urban planners, urban planning being a subject that deals with closely deals with the everyday workings and livings of the ordinary citizens in a town, city, or a region. Obviously is a very human and humanistic subject, and a very controversial subject, because obviously as human beings we all have different types of breakfasts, but we all eat breakfast. So it's very difficult to come up with a dish that suits everybody. And as planners, we're supposed to prepare a dish for a whole lot of people. And we 99% out of 100 we fail to do that. And this is that, it may sound a little silly what I'm saying and very obvious, but this is one of the biggest problems of urban planning. It's as simple as that. And from the first planning work that one starts, one faces this matter. Now, in the Western world, where the municipalities and the government agencies are, in a way, more democratic, there is a better liaison between the urban planner and the ordinary people. In Iran, until recently, this hasn't been the case. And whatever urban planning work which was suggested or carried out, or plans that were made, from top to bottom, and a lot of the decisions which were made were unrealistic in some ways, and even if they were realized, or in the process of realization, they were often met a lot of opposition from the lower down authorities or the ordinary people. Now, in recent times, with the elections of municipal councils, which the municipal council, the law of the creation of municipal councils was done during the انقلاب مشروطه, the constitutional revolution of Iran. But almost, more than 100 years, it took more than 100 years for this to become a reality at the time of the presidency of who was our president? Khatami. And this is a great, very great move by Khatami, and not much has been written and not much has been said on this. But these village councils and city councils are the very basic principles, constitute the very basic principles of democracy. And fortunately in Iran, they were very cleverly made by Khatami in a way that the higher authorities, like the elections of the president or the election of the parliament, they don't have to be approved by the Guardian Council. Consequently, there is very much less meddling with these city councils and so on. And of course, we've had recently this problem of this Zoroastrian gentleman who is having been refused after election. But there has been a huge movement in Iran opposing this stopping of this gentleman. And this in itself shows that the average Iranians are very democratically minded and they really want these things to go. Now, the reason that I discuss this in this way is because when we did these master plans and projects for urban planning, we didn't have any city councils at the time. And even we were appointed by the Ministry of Development and Housing. And we, whereas we made a great deal of local research and we studied the local situation very carefully, and we tried very much to get the local public opinion as well, and to discuss a number of things with them. But on the whole, we were considered as outsiders doing a plan for some of these towns. And this was always a problem. And at that time, not only we didn't have these municipal councils, but we didn't also, our municipalities were extremely backward, and they lacked the necessary funding, and they lacked the necessary technical know-how, and they didn't have enough engineers or architects or planners and so on to carry out these master plans or other plans. And this has been a big problem. Now, another aspect of urban planning is a big stopper to urban development in Iran is that we have no organization that can cope for a long-term plan. And urban planning, by it's a subject of long-term planning, and you can devise the best of plans, and if you don't have the necessary organization to carry out this, and these involve periods of at least 15, 20, 25, or even 50 years for certain urban planning matters. And this has been one of the big problems that has, in fact, pretty well no urban plan has come to fruition because of this problem. And another problem in Iran, which is, I think, perhaps the most basic problem that we have generally in Iran, and this is not only about urban planning, is lack of management. Again, urban planning being a widespread subject, it's not limited to one profession. An urban planner is like the conductor of an orchestra, a huge orchestra, and he has to deal with very many different subjects: economy, sociology, population, etc., etc. And well, this needs both management skills on the part of the planner who is doing the plan, and once the plan is done, even more important, there must be some managerial experience and management know-how to carry out these plans. And this has always been the biggest of our problems. Still, one of the problems that we have, because most of urban planning, in fact, a number of planners dealing is usually with municipalities. And of course, one may, on occasions, be dealing with private enterprise and also other government agencies and so on. But generally speaking, one is dealing with municipalities. And unfortunately, our mayors are not still elected. And it's the city councils that elect the mayors. And the mayors are not directly elected by the people. And this is another, we need another Dr. Khatami, hopefully, to initiate this at some future date. And why is this important? Is because when the municipality council elects the mayor, in fact, it becomes one unity. Whereas when you have a popularly elected mayor and also a popularly elected municipality council, they are elected on different levels, rather like the National Assembly and the President, and so that they may even be from the same party, or they may not, and so on and so forth. But anyway, they don't follow the same docile way. And we had this problem during the Ghalibaf period, that the municipal council, although elected popularly, was too much. They were too much all in one hand, and so on and so forth. What do I do as this? Yes. Now, this was a very brief, and as I prepared you beforehand, mundane overall view of the problems of urban planning in Iran. But it's not all negative. We have some positive sides as well. And one of the very important aspects in the positive side of this is that the general know-how and the general interest that the people are taking into urban planning generally. And they really take a great interest And of course, the high participation in the elections of the municipalities this last year showed that how interested people were in, my friend Bernard Urquhart usually takes these statistics and he analyzes them, and I haven't seen his latest analysis, but this has been a very interesting, and not only in Tehran, which the whole 20 members were from one party, but in other parts of Iran as well. The people are showing great interest for their general environment and their cityscape and so on and so forth. Now, this is I'm going to the other part of, the second part of my talk. There's been lots of theories. I'm not going to talk about the theories of urban planning. None of them have been very successful, and none of them have really been very practical. But yes, and this is the Ebenezer Howard proposal for the Garden City. And I happened to, I did my secondary schooling in Welling Garden City, so I know. It's a very dull, very place to live in. Lots of trees and lots of greenery and so on, but there's no city life and so on and so forth. And our garden cities in Iran, which I studied the Isfahan, and Isfahan was actually, that Dr. Curtis mentioned, was conceived as a garden city. And you can see the difference between these two concepts. And other theoretician, Le Corbusier, for instance, he proposed a sort of standard blocks of buildings surrounded by greenery and served by roads and highways and so on and so forth, which again is not very interesting. And the haphazard development, the best example being New York. And one of the problems, the physical problems of urban planning is that whereas in the old concept of urban planning, that where you have Venice or whatever you have an ensemble of plan and a harmonious entity. Unfortunately, as planners in modern concepts, we haven't been able to solve with the new buildings and the new skyscrapers this duality of single buildings, very often very high, very large, and very overwhelming, and they're conceived as single buildings, in fact. And generally speaking, of course, New York, the picture you see is, well, every single building has just gone up without any thought of what is next door to it. And perhaps the very worst modern example is Dubai, which is, this is quite complimentary. I didn't find it worse. This doesn't look as bad as Kuwait is. It's, I don't know which one of you have visited it. But it really is a catastrophic urban plan. And for a new city that has been developed in the last 20 years and so on, you get traffic jams and you get all sorts of problems that even older cities don't have. Some of the smaller European countries happen to handle these things a little better. This is Rotterdam. You see, in my opinion, having studied these new developments, when you have a lot of high-rises or skyscrapers next to one another, and you can't control them, the result is very bad and catastrophic. Just a few high-rises which are well placed may not be so bad. Of course, this is an example in Amsterdam. Why couldn't Dubai have been, I'm not saying that it should have been, that the architecture should be this, but Dubai has gone on to these high-rise. They wanted to create a New York in Dubai, in fact, and it hasn't been successful. Whereas I think if they would have opted for a mixture of high-rise buildings and low-rise ensembles, it would have been much more harmonious. None of these new developments, wherever in Canada, Australia, Europe, or wherever, I can't find a successful example. And this is Australia. It's less, probably the picture is better, so one sees less of the problems, but the problems still exist. And I think Berlin, which was almost destroyed entirely during the Second World War, has managed reasonably well to redevelop its physical nature. And you see, you don't get too many high rises there. Now we come to Tehran. Now Tehran is, as you see, it's the same thing, more or less the same, becoming the same way as most of the other cities in the world. So this is not an Iranian problem. This is an international problem, a worldwide problem that I must admit, apologize on behalf of all our colleagues that in my opinion we have failed and we have not been able to create a reasonable physical urban planning, modern urban planning. This, I could have stood here and advertised because it's my work and that we're very good planners and we do fantastic things and so on. But I'm afraid, looking at the thing very honestly, we have failed to really establish a system that answers the 20th and 21st century physical side of urban planning. This is a view of Tehran which you and I will never have not seen or will never see because it's taken from a special angle. But perspective is a very important thing, both in painting, in architecture, also in urban planning. And this, I am just showing this to show how important perspective is. And in Dubai, for instance, you have no perspective whatsoever. In whatever direction you look, it's just horrible buildings. Now we've gone to Mashhad, that Samar, I'm sure, is going to show you some fabulous pictures of. And this tiny piece here is actually the most important part of. Yes, I'm finished. But it's a pity if you don't look at Mashhad Center, especially the Civic from. And you see what a catastrophic development has been done. Thank you.
Thank you very much for finishing our time. If anybody has a burning question.